Breaking tonight, the stunning march of a frightening new terror group taking control in the heart of the Middle East in a vacuum left by America's commander-in-chief. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Earlier today, new pictures of what may become our newest foreign policy crisis. We cannot yet independently confirm this, but we are told this is amateur video of an incredibly radical al-Qaeda offshoot celebrating the capture of the Iraqi city of Tikrit. This is the same group that 24 hours ago announced the capture of Mosul, where al-Qaeda flags today fly over a town where hundreds of Americans died, driving terror forces from this region. Eyewitnesses say when this group swept into Mosul, 500,000 people ran in terror, including the Iraqi soldiers that we paid to train. This is the third major city this group has taken over in recent weeks. First it was Fallujah, then Mosul, now Tikrit. Tonight, we believe they control all of this territory, and they are nowhere near done. One of the generals who warned that leaving this country too soon and with no residual forces in place would result in, quote, absolute disaster is my next guest. Four-star general and former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Jack Keane. General, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
And the question I have for you tonight is the vision that Osama bin Laden had of a caliphate, of an Islamic state where they would live amongst themselves and plan jihad against the West, coming to fruition as we see that map expand.
That's absolutely what's happening, Megyn. This has been a 30-year intellectual drive for them to dominate and control Muslim lands. And this is forming right in front of us. It begins east of Aleppo in Syria and moves all the way to the Syrian border. Not everything, but a lot of territory and a lot of towns. And then northern Iraq and western Iraq, and closing in on the capital city of some 7 million people. This caliphate exists, and it will be the most menacing thing in the Middle East if unattended.
You warned about this. I mean, I understand how people are going to feel about going into Iraq in the first place, but we were there, and we sacrificed 4,500 American men and women to liberate that country, and people were voting. The Iraqis were voting, and we left without any residual forces. We announced our withdrawal date, and people like you, who have devoted your life to this issue, to these types of issues, were jumping up and down saying, we will lose it all if we don't handle this differently. Your thoughts on where we now are tonight?
Well, in places like Germany, Italy, Japan, and South Korea, after conflict where we left forces, we've had enormous success. We didn't want to leave forces there because of major security problems. We had some issues with al-Qaeda leadership, but the al-Qaeda leadership in 2009 had admitted that they were defeated and don't send any more fighters. So the issue in front of us was to keep an eye on them, keep our intelligence sources, keep all our plugs to every intelligence source that we have in front of the Iraqi security forces, and then to work the political maturation of Maliki and his government by staying engaged. We pulled the forces out. Maliki resented that. We had no leverage with him, and then we could no longer do what we had done for a number of years, Megyn, and that is save Maliki from himself. Now, Maliki
let me ask you this, because I think that, the Americans, they're worried about what's going to happen to Americans. They worry about the Iraqis as well. But when we look back at how this has unfolded, first came Fallujah, and men like you raised red flags after that as well, saying this is going to go from bad to worse. The president was asked about the terrorists retaking Fallujah in January of 2014, and he told, I think it was the New York Magazine, and perhaps we have the quote and we can put it on the board for the viewers, that they were JV, that this was JV al-Qaeda. The analogy we use around here sometimes, and I think this is accurate, is if a JV team puts on a Lakers uniform, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant. That seemed to betray an attitude about this group that we didn't need to take them very seriously. And now tonight they've captured 2 more cities.
Well, the fact of the matter is the administration has been focused on the senior leadership of the al-Qaeda in Pakistan, and they have decimated that leadership to a degree, as the president has said. But what he doesn't tell the American people is that all of that leadership has been replaced almost immediately, as was Osama bin Laden. The fact of the matter is, the Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, as you have noted many times, Megan, is on the rise in the Middle East and in Africa. And this is the most significant accomplishment the Al-Qaeda have had to date in its history.
Why are they on the rise? I mean, you know, is it, obviously we left a vacuum behind us in Iraq, but what is it about, in other words, is there something we could be doing to be stopping this?
Yeah, absolutely. We have no comprehensive strategy, none, to defeat the Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. We need political and military alliances in these countries where we can help train people, provide intelligence, share it, provide technology, provide equipment, much as we did post-World War II against the communist ideology. We formed political and military alliances and got together and said, we're not going to stand for this threat, and that was very successful.
Why aren't we doing that?
We're doing none of that, Megan. None of it. We help a little bit in Yemen, we help a little bit in Kenya, we help a little bit in Somalia, but no comprehensive strategy to share intelligence and do all the things that I have suggested. This is not rocket science. We don't have to fight all these people. We can let those countries do it, but they need intelligence and they need our skill sets and the benefit of what we have learned by being engaged with these organizations for over 10 years.
General Jack Keane, thank you, sir.
Take care, Megan.
These three cities now overrun by Islamic extremists are the same ones U.S. troops fought and died trying to liberate. 4,500 Americans making the ultimate sacrifice toward that end, allowing President Obama to make claims like this one.
I said we'd refocus on the people who actually attacked us on 9/11. And today, Al-Qaeda's on the run and Osama bin Laden is dead.
Buck Sexton is a former CIA officer who worked in one of the cities taken over by these Al-Qaeda-related insurgents. And Pete Hegseth is a Fox News contributor and a veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And as you see now, you know, Iraq basically fall under the control of a group so radical that even Al-Qaeda has disowned it. That, you know, the beheadings are continuing now. They are targeting Iraqis in the streets. They are fleeing for their lives in a city that American troops liberated. What is your reaction, Pete?
It makes me sick. I don't know any other way to look at it. I'm forlorn. I mean, you watch the coverage of this and you're resigned to the reality that we're watching one of the single greatest failures in American foreign policy unfold before our eyes. I know what it feels like now. To be a Vietnam veteran watching the fall of Saigon. It hasn't happened in Baghdad yet, but to go from the Anbar province to Mosul, down to Beiji, into Tikrit, they're in the city of Samarra, where I was as well, and making their way further down what we called MSR Tampa toward Baghdad. This Islamic State of Iraq and Syria is an organized group. If they're able to take and seize ground with a strategy to choke off Baghdad, which is exactly what they're doing, prevent security forces from reinforcing the gains that they've already made, they have a strategic intent, which the general laid out, which is to maintain a caliphate from which to operate, plan, train, and export jihad, which is exactly why Buck and I and so many of this generation were deployed. But this president, this commander-in-chief, is obsessed with ending wars with no consequence about whether we win them or even if we finish them properly. That's why we're watching these types of things unfold before our eyes.
You know, this happens on the heels not only of the president saying that Al-Qaeda is on the run, Buck, but in a week in which we now have released 4-star generals of the Taliban out of a prison that our men and women fought to put in there in the first place. So we've got this happening in Iraq despite the warnings of the generals to the president, which he did not heed. And now we have Afghanistan, where we're literally letting out the terror leaders before the war is over. Your thoughts?
Well, unlike in this country where it seems the commander-in-chief, Megyn, is so willing to make decisions about war and peace based upon election cycles, the war does not end for the global jihadists. It has not ended in Afghanistan, and as we see, it has not ended in Iraq either. I've been in touch with friends of mine who are still inside the intelligence community in the past couple of days, and their shorthand version of what's going on is this is the nightmare scenario in Iraq. This is as bad as anybody could have thought it would get after the decision was made by this administration to completely evacuate all real military presence out of the country. And what you see here, by the way, is something that even if the Iraqi military were to stand up and push back against against this. We've seen 1,000 people released from prison. The intelligence networks that the Iraqi army and intel services would have, they could be essentially eradicated by this point in time.
They seized the banks, too. This terrible, terrible group seized the banks. They've got money. They've got resources. They're driving our Humvees. According to the reports, they've seized the weaponry and the support that we've given the Iraqis to try to fight them. They have it now.
It's astonishing, Megan. The Iraqi army and police forces in Mosul, at least, according to eyewitnesses, they didn't just leave their posts. They didn't just retreat. They took off their uniforms, dropped their weapons, and said, I'm out of here. You can imagine the psychological damage that does to all the civilians around them who are expecting to be protected by them. And yes, as you pointed out, they've actually now gotten their hands on hundreds of millions of dollars from an Iraqi bank. So they're well-financed. They're moving in convoys of up to 60 vehicles down main highways inside of Iraq. As Pete pointed out, this is essentially an al-Qaeda invasion force, and they are many steps down the road towards taking over the entire northern and western half of this country. That
in the heart of the Middle East, Pete. I mean, that's the thing that Americans need to be concerned about tonight is however you feel about the Iraq war and whether we should have gone there or not gone there. The question tonight is how it ended and what the results are tonight, because when you hear that this group is so radical that al-Qaeda doesn't want to be associated with it, and now it's basically got Iraq under its control, Americans need to worry. I mean, if this is the beginning of the true caliphate, if this is centralized Islamic jihad, then we are looking at something very serious when it comes to our own foreign policy that needs to be dealt with.
Absolutely. Americans need to wake up. They need to wake up to the reality that, as Buck said, these wars just don't end. The problem is everyone's war weary. Everyone's over these wars. Iraq, whether you think it was the right idea or not, you may not have liked it. The reality is, right now, because of decisions that have been made for a long time, al-Qaeda is on the march to take over huge swaths of land that they will control and dictate, and our president seems not to care. Literally, Megyn, I don't like to indict him that directly, but in this case, President Obama doesn't care about what's happening in Iraq right now, just like he doesn't care what's happening in Syria and isn't willing to take the steps necessary to prevent. It's not that he's a bad person, it's that he's so over these wars. This is how wars end. They're messy in the 21st century. Problem is, you can do real things to make change, like General Keane outlined.
It's incredible to think that General Keane was there urging General Petraeus to press the president on these issues, and it didn't happen. You know, the willingness and the desire to get out of the war was robust, and yet the generals were warning there would be real consequences, and we seem to be dealing with those tonight. Gentlemen, thank you both.
This is what happens when you listen to politicians, not generals.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Pete,
Megan.
Buck, thank you. Well, just hours ago, our Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel offered his explanation for the decision to free those 5 top Taliban commanders. And Texas Senator Ted Cruz is here on why he believes this may be a threat to U.S. national security. Plus, we are live in Texas as we get new pictures of the unprecedented southern border crisis. Dennis Michael Lynch is on the scene now with some new eyewitness accounts, and that's next.